And then all of a sudden, if you noticed, gold prices and silver prices started to really ratchet up. The dollar started to falter against those assets. And then we had one of those little mini blips in food production. And then countries that were tied to the dollar couldn't afford to import food, and we had the Arab Spring. And so since then, since that 2011, they've gone into a full-on suppression of the futures market for crops. And they put on a full-on suppression for gold and silver. But we're at a point now where that's starting to leak again.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Bob Kudla, TradeLikeAGenius.com. We're talking about cryptos, traditional markets, stocks. The world around us seems financially unstable. We take a look at the weather patterns with all of the grains coming in incredibly low. Trade deals on again, it's off again. But wherever you look across this planet, it's about the food and the lack thereof being grown this year. The numbers are really starting to trickle in now, so we can see what a down step it was from last year's production levels, everywhere from Europe to United States, South America, Australia, with the drought. And everywhere you look, I don't know if it's just saber rattling and distraction factor to 20 now to try to get you not to look at food pricing, but something is definitely gathering right out on the horizon, getting closer and closer every day to us. The signs are all around. So I'm glad we have a chance to speak again, because on the financial side, you know, I look to you for some advice to try to guide me to get through this tumultuous sea of distraction out here. So, Bob, I appreciate you coming on back here, talking with me for a bit. And yeah, we can go from here, and the floor is yours.
TradeLikeAGenius.com. If you've never traded before and want to take advantage of these types of profits every day in the market, I urge you to sign up for one of many Trade Genius online educational courses. Use the promo code HOLIDAY for 50% off non-bundled items. At TradeLikeAGenius.com, tell them Adapt 2030 sent you. Crypto, options, ETFs, and the traditional markets. And on to the interview with Bob Kudla from TradeLikeAGenius.com.
Yeah, hey, Dave, it's always great to see you, you know, and yeah, so let's get a little practical here. So, you know, people always ask me, well, what can we or what should we do? You know, if you're what we would call retail, and just so you know, I'm an experienced trader, I'm considered retail too. So it's not a knock. It's kind of where we sit in the pecking order of how money moves. So there's few avenues in which we can protect ourselves from a stock standpoint. And I want to throw some of those names out for people. And I think, Dave, as we talk into the future, I'll try to get some of these things to you on an ongoing basis so that you can share with your listeners when some of these things set up for some secular moves. And then, of course, you know, if they want to trade with us, they can just sign up. And I think you have links to people can take advantage of our Christmas and our holiday specials if they want to mainline right into us so we can help them make money. Trading the food stocks and trading what I would call the inflationary trend. So when you and I were talking before we came on, is everything's kind of tied together. And so maybe if you don't mind, I'll monologue a little bit on the macro and then tie this into what's happening with the grand solar minimum, and then how these two intersect, and then how you can protect yourself from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, and I'll give you 1 second there. I'm going to put the link in the description box below, TradeLikeAGenius.com. So again, there's a lot of valuable information. I'm not talking about valuable in terms of money, although it is, but it's more value in protecting you and your families and get yourself grand solar minimum ready and grand solar minimum prepared on many different facets here. So Bob, continue on, but the link will be in the description box below the video.
Yeah, so what's happening here in the world market is that everywhere but the United States has gone essentially negative on interest rates. And the reason why the United States has not followed is that we're the reserve currency. So we have to be the responsibility of being a reserve currency is basically a place where the last bastion of fiat has protection. And so we've maintained a positive yield. And what that's done for the United States is that money is leaving everywhere else in the world, and it's coming to the United States. In addition to that, the Fed has opened up the repo market, and they're not telling us exactly who is getting the money. And the rumors have flown from we're mainlining the banks in Hong Kong because of the run on the banks there, to we're mainlining money to Deutsche Bank because there runs on the banks there. And then we also heard that no, it's the four money center banks in the United States that have refused to extend lines of credit to other banks, and they're hoarding dollars. And then we heard that no, it could be the hedge funds have overdrawn their lines, basically. Not overdrawn is the wrong word. They took lines that were secured. That means they couldn't be pulled, and they maxed them out. And that left the banks with not enough cash on hand. At the same time, people are pulling their money out of the stock market while the stock market continues to make all-time highs. And that's a dichotomy that's going to end up in disaster whenever the Jenga board gets pulled. And this is always the problem with this, is that people are crying Chicken Little until Chicken Little is right. This happened in 2008. This happened in 2000, where people for a year were saying, please, please, please pull your money out of the markets. It's overvalued. And everybody looked at those guys saying, oh, you're just Chicken Little, you're an idiot, blah, blah, blah. And they ended up being correct, but they took a lot of pain while they did that. Well, they're doing it again, Dave. And this time the Fed has just basically turned the money machine to auto full. And they're pumping hundreds of billions of dollars in cash into these banks. And so the banks are converting those things into bonds. They're also converting these things into stock purchases. They're also converting these things into cash to pay out people that are leaving the banks. And we don't think they could stop. And what that's going to happen is we're going to have a situation like we had in 2011, where they were putting a lot of liquidity in the market. And then all of a sudden, if you noticed, gold prices and silver prices started to really ratchet up. The dollar started to falter against those assets. And then we had one of those little mini blips in food production. And then countries that were tied to the dollar couldn't afford to import food, and we had the Arab Spring. And so since then, since that 2011, they've gone into a full-on suppression of the futures market for crops. And they put on a full-on suppression for gold and silver. But we're at a point now where that's starting to leak again. And the balance sheet in the United States now is back to where it was before they started that, what they call the quote-unquote quantitative tightening. Now, to give people perspective, is, the United States gets a lot of slam for, oh, you're running all these big deficits, but people don't realize our economy dwarfs anybody else's in the world. And our balance sheet that central banks have been monetizing is around $4 trillion. Well, our GDP is over $20 trillion. If you put China as an example next to us, is that the Chinese have borrowed so much against the central banks that they've put onto their balance sheet that the United States would have a $60 trillion balance sheet, Dave. That's how much trouble China is. And China is basically, those pressure cookers that people have? Well, they have a pressure cooker right now. And if they ever let their yuan float, it would collapse. And they wouldn't be able to import food. They would literally have to change their balance of payment, and running they would have to give away all their exports just to buy imports. And they're loath to do that. And so that's why China's in trouble. But they're going to get to a point now where they're going to have to deal with the United States on food.
And I was looking at that 50 trillion buy pledge that they put out there, and that's all of America's total agriculture for an entire year. So reading how with the difficulty for them to even reach that $50 billion pledge on ag imports is going to be extremely difficult, and it would cause a significant shortage in the U.S. if they were to realize that.
Yeah, politically unpalatable. Can
Not
you just
even.
imagine? Can you imagine Congress if people all of a sudden the price of I watch every day. I do the grocery shopping for my family, so I know what the price of chicken, pork, and beef should be every given week, and so I've been watching pork, and so when we had that bacon shortage, it was because of the Chinese, and people screamed because bacon prices doubled. Can you imagine that it go up 4 or 5x if the Chinese took everything? And the Smithfield Foods, I think it's Smithfield, they own Smithfield.
Yeah, that's right. They were doing quarter hogs and half hogs and just splitting them in half and putting them in a container.
Yeah, they basically told the American people that expect higher prices because the Chinese are going to import a lot. So we didn't even have to do the trade deal. These are fig leaves. And here's the thing, you saw this article too, where they said the Chinese, there's not enough pigs in the world to be butchered for the Chinese to be able to get what they used to have internally. So, and I can't even imagine Congress allowing, they would have export controls on meat products. And Brazil, the Chinese were playing us off against Brazil and Argentina. I think Russia now is going to probably go offline because of the weather pattern shifting. Because they had 3 or 4 really good years where they could surplus this thing as we were going into that cold shoulder. That was their sweet spot. So now they're going to start running into problems. So everybody said, "Oh, Brazil is going to be able to take up the slack." I just read the other day, I think I probably read it on your site, where Brazil now has a corn shortage. Well, what do they feed pigs? Corn. Now they're going to substitute with soybeans, and so there's a lot of issues here that you can't keep pulling on all these strings, and so we're going to have an issue. And I did another interview today with another social media person, and we were talking specifically around how long can the Fed keep doing this? It's oil and food. And if you notice, oil prices now in the United States have drifted over $60. If it goes up over $80 a barrel, it becomes a political issue. If it gets over 100, then the Fed's is gonna have no choice but to raise interest rates to tamp down oil. And that's what killed the 2008 the market is they lost control of the energy market. And so these are the headwinds we're dealing with, and precisely when they're going to have have money available for people going into a recession is when these food prices are going to rise, and they're not going to be able to accommodate the people, and it's going to get really interesting. So I think we have 1 year, Dave, where our economy is going to be fine in the United States, even though you see it slowing down. You have to realize we can bring in everything into the United States. We can tell China, guess what? We're putting tariffs on you again, and force the manufacturers closer to home. But that can only work for so long, and then you basically run out of that game, and then we're going to be in a situation where we have all this debt that needs to be serviced. And there's not going to be an ability to do so, and that's when the whole thing blows up. So we've been telling people, look, you're going to have to get the hard assets because people aren't going to want to trade your fiat. If you listen to this outside the United States, you're already there. I'm sorry. You're already there. So you're going to have to start swapping out for hard assets. You need to be in silver and gold miners from your local currency, so you can protect yourself. You're not in the United States. It's going to be 1 year from now that you're going to need it because the dollar will start to falter, and those mining assets are going to rise appreciably in price. We're talking anywhere from 4 to 10x. All you have to do to understand what it's going to look like is just look back at what the top prices were for these miners in just 2011, and that's what we're going to get back to.
Yeah, we're so insulated in the United States, and myself living outside of the U.S., overseas, and traveling a little bit here and there. The United States is going to be one of the last places to feel all of this. So you might feel that, oh, these guys are just talking and nothing's really happening because, the media and the corporate media in the United States is only feeding you this rosy picture of how good it is. And, they're making you distance yourself from the rest of the planet. But literally, the rest of the planet can't afford these food price rises that are just around the corner. And the lack of pork in China alone is already causing some civil unrest in supermarkets and cities because Chinese New Year is just around the corner and they must have pork. It's not a choice not to have it. It's a must. So now we get into the cultural issues versus these things. So it is going to be the United States, the last place for these food price rises to hit. The unavailability that we saw these cans disappearing from store shelves early in the year with peas and different kind of canned fruits and vegetables. That was the government buying to stockpile. But in true terms of shortages, people just aren't going to be able to afford it out. And look, Arab areas first, Middle East, and I'm going to say Pakistan, Afghanistan. India is already showing signs of duress. And everywhere you look, it's just hanging on by a thread. And be so thankful and grateful that you're in the United States because we're going to be the last run over by the steamroller here.
The one thing to look at is that if a country has to import food and if a country has to import energy, those are the countries that are going to fail first. India is in really, really bad shape. They had tremendous opportunities to reform their economy, and they chose not to do it. And for democracy, you think they would have been a little bit smarter about it. At least the Chinese, all their faults have, they've attempted to be as independent as they could be, but the Indian population is going to be in big trouble. I mean, they can't afford any rise in fuel, any rise in food. And we're talking tomato and onion prices go up, causes riots over there. And they tried to raise the price of fuel and cause a riot. And look at France
and Iran as well. Look at Iran, and they raised the price of fuel like 3x over there, and that country just shut down.
Yeah, you and I talked about that last month. My neighbor is his family's from Iran. I mean, he's been here for 30 years, but many of his family members. I went back and said, "Hey, how's it going over?" He goes, "Oh, it's bad. It's bad." And that government's holding on by a thread over there. And that's the whole thing. We won't get sidetracked in the whole Green New Deal thing. I think it's dead. So for people worrying about the politicians and the Green New Deal, it's done. Greta retired last week. You notice that? She's done. She had her Che Guevara moment. That she read off that thing about putting people against the wall. That's what Che Guevara did. Her family's Antifa. They're Che Guevara. That should just tell anybody, if you're a left of center person, that's who you're putting in office. People who would not hesitate to, because you disagree with them. And so the backlash was overwhelming. She's done.
I can't believe she didn't know that she's, how close they are to Germany, and she's supposed to be an educated, at least into high school, and they didn't know what that meant. That is unacceptable that she did not know what that meaning meant, being so close to the very epicenter of where World War II originated from. And that's what the communists did after Russia ran through that area and annexed everything. And they still didn't know what that meant to put somebody against the wall after 50 years of hardship through Europe like that. Unacceptable.
Oh, she knew. She knew because she wore a Che Guevara shirt once, and she wore an Antifa shirt. And Che Guevara, that was his thing, put people against the wall. They would just walk up and so that's what these people are like. Their view is such. But I wanted to say we no longer need to be distracted by that because they're done. It's passé. Boris Johnson's victory.
Yeah, that was a resounding get the hell out.
That was done. It's done. Macron, you see, he's backtracking like crazy. Merkel now is isolated over there. Eastern Europeans never bought into this thing, and the Mediterranean countries, they're only in it if they got money out of it. So the whole Madrid thing was a bust, and the world's getting colder and people aren't stupid. And I think that's what happened with UK is that You have people who are what I would call, I think, normal people like you and I. So people that probably lean a little bit left, what I would say in terms of hey, I want to get a fair deal. I'm okay with the government helping me. Well, those people found out that the left anymore is not about helping you. It's about owning you. And those people voted Tory in droves. This is like a reverb of the Trump thing in 2016. And I think we're getting a preview of what's going to happen with Trump 2020 is that they scared the people. These people scared the people that these people want to totally radically change how we live. And people aren't ready for that. Hey, yeah, give me help with college. Give me help with healthcare, right? Make things more affordable. Don't fundamentally change my existence. I don't want that. And that's what's happening. And we have a point now where people don't trust the government. At the same time, we're going to need effective centralized authorities to help what I think are going to be some pretty regional problems. In the United States, we can have certain states kind of go offline, and people are going to need to be able to share together to do it. But if we lost the trust, it's going to be a big problem. On my wall over here, I just sat down and I wrote, I think if I ever get around to it, if I ever can find myself a free 300 or 400 hours, I'm going to write a book called The Decentralized Future, because I think people have had it up to here with centralization. And I think what's going to also foment it is some of the breakdowns are going to happen with food. I don't think people have any clue of the disruptions that are going to occur, and people just aren't prepared for it. And you and I talked about this for years about if you go into somebody's home, Chicago went offline about 5 or 6 years ago on food stamps overnight, and those people were rioting because they lived day by day. And so we haven't prepared people how to be prepared. We spent all our time as a government to make people dependent, and that cycle of they're not going to help me is going to be pretty nasty for a lot of places around the world.
And to take a look at Iceland, they had that Category 3 hurricane that turned into a snow cane up there, dropping 7 feet of snow. Not one single road was passable in Iceland, not one.
It's amazing.
But they were all prepared, and that's the whole thing. You didn't see a bunch of panic going on. You didn't see looting of supermarkets, because the government in Iceland tells them to get ready. They have volcanoes there. They have blizzards. So people are more on the preparedness side anyway, of having at least 2 to 4 weeks of food and water in their homes. So when that blizzard came in, that Category 3, by the way, which was the highest snow total ever recorded for this month of the year in Iceland, and it was the highest wind speed ever recorded also. So they broke 2 records in the same single storm that reached Category 3. But they just, okay, we'll wake up in the morning and we still have food, we have firewood, we're good to go. But here we're outlawing fireplaces and, wood-burning stoves in the U.S. Everybody's getting on the dole. And, I've said it before, if you have an extra $3 in your pocket and you're walking out of a supermarket with $3, that's wasted money and time. You could go back in and get 2 bags of beans that you could use later. And you might scoff at that and go, well, 2 or 3, $10 extra in my pocket. Yeah, but how many times do you go to the store, and how many opportunities would you have had to buy lower priced food right now that you could store for a longer term? Because when we move into this thing here, the availability of food and supply chains and everything revolving in the supply chain revolves on credit, where we started talking about in the beginning of the interview here. If that snaps, then everything else snaps behind it, and no trucks are moving, no ships are moving, factories are sitting idle. And then where do you sit then once your store empties out? I mean, you got to have a little pre-planning, because the signs are really all around us. And another thing, don't go into this in a fear mode. Understand that this grand solar minimum is a grand change for society. And if you look back the last 10 to 12 of these where we have records, even going back into the Homeric minimum, 2500 BC, the change is always the same exact thing. It has something to do with the electromagnetic changes on the sun that change electromagnetic frequency receiver in your body and brain. And for some reason, whatever the reins are on society or the control mechanisms, they just don't seem to work. And there always seems to be a change after a grand solar minimum. The food production's always hit. the economy's hit, and the way people perceive reality and their leadership around them is always hit as well. They always want change. This is just part of the game going through a grand solar minimum. It's not the first thing like, oh no, it's never happened. This is just part of the blueprint of it. So understand what it is. Please look back in history, follow the cycles and what changed: the Maunder minimum, the Sporer minimum, the Wolf minimum. Go back at 800 AD, 400 AD. Go back to the very turn at 2,000 years ago and take a look at all these things in the 400 BC and take a look what happened with Rome at the time. Like, it's always the exact same circumstance. It's going to play out differently now. We have greater population, but look for vast governmental changes coming too, because people just are not going to accept this kind of dark evil that's over them. I think that this is the light that's kind of shining through and breaking through electromagnetically, where everybody's waking up to what you talked about. They just see it in front of them now, how much of a lie it is right in front of them, how much they've been used and now are trying to be controlled right in front of them, so starkly in their faces, like, whoa, what just happened? I never saw that before. But for some reason, this last 2 years, it's been coming out, and there's been much, 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 much more global awareness to the plight that we're really in terms of how government and finance, central banking have put so many countries under duress. And it's just, people aren't having it anymore. And understand, as we move forward, people are going to have it even less, month by month, year by year. Less food, banking, finance troubles, and also governmental, well, shenanigans going on. But anyway, yeah, there's a lot of changes happening. But just remember, people have gotten through this many, many times before. We're still here. There's even a bigger population than there was when a quarter of the world's population died in the 1600s during this same event. So we're resilient. As long as we know what to do, you can prepare for it financially, mentally, spiritually, and with food as well. And I'll leave it right there.
Yeah, I'm an optimist, so I'm hopeful. The ingenuity that's already being displayed. I was pretty funny. My wife got took car, and so I was picking her up, and while I was waiting, the hill above the service center, I'm sitting there going, we probably could put about 50 or 60 fruit trees on there. There's so much, like out here in California, there's so much land that is cut up in the hillsides here where I live that could easily be converted into food. In fact, where my house is, and I'm only 3 miles from the ocean, we were barley fields, and we're on hills. You know what I mean? So they grew barley out here. This was almost kind of like Israel in terms of the climate, where they would dry farm. They would put barley in November, December, and let the rains come, and they would harvest it out in April and May. And so grains grow great here, and there's a lot of plots, and with the genetic changes, I know people get all weirded out over GMO and stuff like that, but you may not have a choice, but they're doing some pretty incredible things in terms of shorting stalks to be able to put more energy into the seeds, get the seed, bringing the growing season down, because we're going to go into, Canada's going to go offline. I'm sorry to my Canadian friends here. You're going offline in this Dalton minimum.
Well, it's already gone. It's already begun to go offline. It's not going to. It's in mid flow right now of going offline.
Well, they need a couple of years where the farmers are literally not farming, and it takes repetition for people to see that this is not going to work, and so Canada's going to go offline, and with these ingenuity, there was a farmer in Nebraska did a really cool thing. He basically dug a trench from his house to his barn. It was like 9 feet wide by 10 feet deep, and then he put a dome in there, and then he made a shelf, and he now sells oranges in the farmer's market in Nebraska from his farm in Nebraska. And it's basically, so there's going to be, people are going to have to kind of rethink, how to survive. And it was worth it for him, because the cost of transport was such that the premium that he paid, to grow them, he still was competitive in the marketplace, and people got locally grown fruit. And he said, look, I'm agnostic. It's my temperature is the same all the time. I don't have to do things. And I think people are going to have to really start thinking through how to do some of this stuff. Yeah. But what you have to do, people have to think incrementally. You have to, I have a garden in my backyard. So, okay, I can't grow 100% what I need, but if I grow 20% what I need, that's a good thing, Yeah. And people need to start thinking how, wherever their situation is, how you're going to be able to incrementally take a burden off the system and do that. And that's what's going to take. But we just have to keep educating people in a positive way. Commercial real estate here is going to be a bust in the United States. Malls are going empty. Why can't these be food malls? So it's just going to take the price point of the property will have to get to a point where it's worthwhile. 50, 60,000 square foot mall that has skylights and everything in it, hey, you could grow stuff. And I think those are the kind of things that'll start happening. You could create these multi-use facilities where people are living and they have grow floors, so none of that stuff is beyond, I don't think is Buck Rogers anymore. I think the physics of LED lighting, we're going to go back to nuclear. I don't know if you saw this. I know we're just jumping around, but they're ready to approve these mini nuke plants. I don't know if you saw that. If you're not, look it up. It's pretty cool. They're going to be like city size, for city size nuke plants. They're tiny, and the United States government is certifying these right now. So you'd be able to drop these in and be able to regionally produce energy. You're talking about hey, I'll put one in Alaska, right? You can run the city of Fairbanks. We're going to have to go nuclear. It's the only way in which we're going to be able to grow food cheap enough, with energy cheap enough and stable enough. This whole renewable thing is nice. I own a solar energy company, so I'm a big believer in renewables if they're profitable and if they're a good return for people. But nuclear is our only really long-term option for survival. And India is going nuclear, by the way. I think they're going to commission 14 new nuke plants, Dave.
Yes, let me interject there. I know Russia also is doing the same thing, but they're putting them on barges so they can move them across the river system there. And they've already set up the cities, so these barges will just pull up, and they already have the electrical couplers there. When I say a coupler, I'm talking something the size of a room to connect in for city power, already ready. I mean, they're standardizing everything for the movement of these, because what they had, at least the way it was explained to me by somebody who's working on this in Russia, is if they have power outages, they have enough barges to move through where they can give consistent power for 4 days. You're going to go on a blackout for 3 days, but the barge will be back. So they're not going to go down for weeks or months. It's about going down for a certain number of days on a certain schedule so everybody can prepare and get ready for it. So when the blackouts come, they know that the barge will be on the return trip, that there'll be electricity returned. And then during those 4 days, everybody can do what they need to in terms of sewage and sanitation and factory production and whatever else it might need to be for refrigeration, storage for all the food products. But if it's on a schedule, it's very precise, and then everybody can adjust to it on that schedule. But so far, the number that I had was 4 days on, 3 days off in the worst case scenario. And I was like, worst case scenario, really? We're talking about going down indefinitely or for months in the States, and your worst case scenario is 4 days off, 3 days on? Like, what are they doing over there that is so different from our mind frame here in the States? That's their worst case, 4 days on, 3 days off. Excuse me, reverse. They
have no illusions, Dave. They can't afford to be complacent. That's those people lose power. I'm talking about political power. So look, everybody's going to go nuke because people aren't going to be able to afford to import energy. So that's why India's doing it. Plus, the pollution's killing their people, and it's going to be the way to go. And before I got, because I got to run off today a little bit. In fact, I'm a little late now. I want people to look at a stock called DBA and a stock called MOS. Those are one's an ETF and one's a stock. Maybe Dave, you and I can pick this up and and talk about it because I do have to jump off right now. If maybe we could talk stocks and maybe catch up tomorrow or Wednesday. Does that work for you?
Sure does. Yeah. And I've been talking with Bob Kudla here, tradelikeagenius.com. And if you like the information we were talking about today and you found some value in it, like, hey, we're kind of have something we're talking about to give you a glimpse of the future. Bob has much more at the site there, which I have in the description box below. Click and go.
And I've been speaking with Bob Kudla from tradelikeagenius.com. Learn to make money every day with the pros. Use the promo code HOLIDAY for 50% off non-bundled items.